Hi everybody, welcome back to your annotation videos. This is a video for Act 3, Scene 1. We've just had a break to allow you to do your assessment on Acts 1 and 2, the extract question. If you haven't yet done that question, you'll find all of the resources on the VLE. You need to make sure that you do that task and you submit it to your teacher by the 18th of May, and only at that point do you then resume your annotations with your text or your notes on the text. So we'll crack on now with Act 3, Scene 1. So in Act 3, Scene 1, we're in a public place with Mercutio and Benvolio and their men, their associated servants, on stage. In this scene, Mercutio is outraged when Romeo refuses to fight Tybalt when challenged. This results in the death of both Mercutio and Thibault as another brawl breaks out in the streets. So we're in a public place, Act 3, Scene 1. Benvolio: I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire. The day is hot, the capels are abroad, and if we meet, we shall not scape a brawl. For now, these hot days is the mad blood stirring. So here Mercutio is saying, he's warning to the other men, saying, look, Benvolio, look, Mercutio, we need to leave this place. The Capulets are around, and I can feel a brawl in the air. He says the day is becoming hot. Remember, Benvolio, remember that nominative determinism we talked about right back at the beginning of the play? Benvolio comes from the word benevolent, meaning good. So all the time we need to be reminded that Benvolio is, of course, the peacemaker in the story. Specifically, when he keeps saying this, the day is hot. These hot days is the mad blood stirring. We've got these two references to the heat in Verona. And remember, pathetic fallacy is where the weather gives an indication of the overall mood or the atmosphere. And so in this case, the hot weather is reminding us of those rising tensions. Remember, those of you who did Lord of the Flies, you'll remember that moment where Simon is killed. There is that huge storm on the beach, the tension begins to rise, the heat rises, and then the storm comes. It's a similar idea here. And so the pathetic fallacy represents the tensions in Verona. And this quotation is really important. These hot days is the mad blood stirring. You'll remember at the beginning we talked about how blood is intrinsic to identity. And of course, identity, whether you're a Montague or a Capulet, is the cause of the feud in Verona. So it's reminding us of that feud. And equally, the mad blood stirring embodies the passions and the violence of Verona and the fact that those tensions are right at the surface. So we get that sense that something is about to break out, something devastating is about to happen here. Remember, the friar warned Romeo earlier on, these violent delights have violent ends. So that kind of prophecy about something going terribly wrong has already been shared with us. Okay, Mercutio continues. Thou art like one of these fellows that, when he enters the confines of a tavern, claps me his sword upon the table and says, God send me no need of thee, and by the operation of the second cup, draws him on the draw, when indeed there is no need. So Mercutio is basically saying to Benvolio there, you're like the kind of guy who says, hold me back, don't let me fight. And then within seconds, you're the first one drawing your sword to fight. Benvolio says, am I like such a fellow? Come, thou art as hot as a jack in thy mood as any in Italy, and as soon moved to be moody, and as soon moody to be moved. So he accuses him of hypocrisy. He accuses Benvolio of talking about peace, but really he's the first person to go for any conflict. And what too? Nay, and there were two such, we should have none shortly, for one would kill the other. Thou wilt quarrel with a man that hath a hair more or a hair less in his beard than thou hast. Thou wilt quarrel with a man for cracking nuts, having no other reason but that thou hast hazel eyes. What eye but such an eye would spy out such a quarrel? Thy head is as full of quarrels as an egg is full of meat, and yet thy head hath been beaten as an addle as an egg for quarrelling. Thou hast quarrelled with a man for coughing in the street, because he hath awakened thy dog that had lain asleep. Notice here how Romeo's speech is becoming quite erratic. Remember we talk about Romeo speaking in prose, Mercutio speaking in prose, so having broken away from speaking in the normal verse in which Shakespeare writes, and this shows that Mercutio is becoming more volatile, more quarrelsome, more confrontational. So we can sense that Mercutio is the one who is going to be the main catalyst for fighting erupting here. In the sun, didst thou not fall out with a tailor for wearing his new doublet before Easter, with another for tying his new shoes with old riband, and yet thou wilt tutor me from quarrelling? And I was so apt to quarrel as thou art, any man should buy the fee simple of my life for an hour and a quarter. The fee simple? Oh, simple! Enter Tybalt, Petruchio, and others. By my head, here comes the Capulets. By my heel, I care not. Follow me close, for I will speak to them. Gentlemen, Gooden, a word with one of you. So notice how Tybalt again, how Benvolio is aware of the tension about to break out, and Mercutio here behaves as though he's not concerned. He behaves in an intentionally confrontational way. Tybalt says, follow me close, for I will speak to them. Gentlemen, Gooden, a word with one of you. And but one word with one of us, couple it with something, make it a word and a blow. You shall find me apt enough that, sir, and you will give me occasion. Could you not take some occasion without giving? Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo. So he's saying, you know of Romeo, you're friends with Romeo. Consort, what dost thou make us minstrels? And thou make minstrels of us. Look to hear nothing but discords. Here's my fiddlestick. Here's that shall make you dance. Zounds, consort. We talk here in the public haunt of men. Either withdraw unto some private place, or reason coldly of your grievances, or else depart. Here all eyes gaze on us. So Benvolio was concerned about the prince's warning earlier on. He said, if you once again disturb the quiet of our streets, your life shall forfeit the peace, shall pay the forfeit of the peace. So Benvolio was worried about this idea that a fight could break out in public. He's worried about the punishment and the law. In that case, he's worried about the punishment they will incur for fighting again in the streets. And equally, Benvolio's role is always to keep the peace. But Mercutio says, men's eyes were made to look, let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure, I. So look at this imperative here, let them gaze. I will not budge. That statement he makes, men's eyes were made to look. His language here is intentionally confrontational. And this represents a lot about Mercutio in terms of his male aggression, that bravado, that idea of status, that idea of not backing down from the challenge or from the disrespect of somebody else. Enter Romeo. Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man. Tybalt makes it clear he didn't want to speak to Mercutio anyway. Romeo is the one that he wants. But I'll be hanged, sir, if he wear your livery. Marry, go before to field. He'll be your follower. Your worship in that sense may call him man. Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain. Tybalt, the reason I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain, I am none. Therefore farewell. I see thou knowest me not. Now if you look at this here, we've got that use of that address term, villain. Tybalt calls Romeo a villain. Romeo, by comparison, uses that word and subverts it. He says, villain, I am none. And there's this sense of dramatic irony, because of course the audience know that the reason why Romeo is saying this and refusing to fight Tybalt is because he is married to Juliet. And of course the audience know that, but the other characters involved do not. So there's this subversion. And in this subversion of the word villain, where he calls him a villain and he subverts it, says, villain, I am none, love has been transformed to hatred through the union with Juliet. Sorry, hatred has been transformed into love. There is love rather than hatred due to his union with Juliet. And so he refuses to fight. Tybalt says, boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me. Therefore turn and draw. I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love, and so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as my own, be satisfied. So notice as well here how he's talking. He calls him good Capulet. He references his name and says that he tenders that name, he worships that name, he holds that name as dearly as he holds his own name, Montague. Remember, the name is important because it represents identity and heritage, and actually that's the reason why they're feuding in the first place. So there's a kind of rejection of the old feud by Romeo as he seeks to turn that violence, that anger and hatred into love through his union with Juliet, but they can't quite escape the old feud that's remaining there. Mercutio says, "Oh, calm, dishonourable, vile submission." He's really deeply offended that Romeo is resisting a fight, and he's calling him cowardly. Alistair Carter carries it away, and he draws his own sword. He's so offended that Romeo will not fight. Tybalt, you rat catcher, will you walk? What wouldst thou have with me? Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives. I've just highlighted here the words rat catcher and king of cats, because these two address terms come together. They're 2 words used to describe Tybalt. But the address terms are an extended metaphor, kind of twofold actually, 2 parts of that extended metaphor. On the one hand, it's this idea that cats are quite cunning and sinister, but equally he also uses that animal imagery by calling him rat catcher, king of cats, to undermine the status of Tybalt. Equally, there's this idea of kind of cats at this time being seen almost as kind of pests, as things that kind of spread around plague and disease and spread around kind of unpleasantness. So he's kind of drawing on that unpleasantness of Tybalt as well, that kind of pest-like nature of him, like a rat, something that might spread diseases, just like Tybalt spreads kind of anger and conflict. Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives, that I mean to make bold withal, and you shall use me hereafter, dry beat the rest of the 8. Will you pluck your sword out of his pilcher by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears ere it be out. So he says to him, draw your sword before my sword is around your ears, before your sword is even out. Okay. Tybalt says, I am for you, so he accepts the challenge. Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up. That's a plea from Romeo there to his friend. Come, sir, your passado. Your passado is a kind of fencing movement. So he kind of goads Tybalt. He kind of leads him and says, come on, bring it on, essentially, is what he's saying there. Draw, Benvolio, beat down their weapons. Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. Tybalt, Mercutio, the prince expressly hath forbid this bandying in Verona streets. Romeo steps between them. Hold, Tybalt, good Mercutio. And Tybalt, under Romeo's arm, thrusts Mercutio in. So he's actually attempting to stab Romeo as Romeo steps in the way. But he actually misses, and underneath Romeo's arm, he stabs Mercutio. And Tybalt flees away with his followers. And this part here, what Mercutio says on that moment where he is stabbed, is really important. There's some really important gold quotations here. So the first sign here that Mercutio is fatally wounded, of course the audience will have just seen him stabbed underneath the arm of Romeo as Romeo tries to shield him and tries to prevent them from fighting. His only words, this short parataxis, I am hurt. And that's the sign that he's fatally wounded. But this idea that he's fatally wounded signals a shift to tragedy. The story becomes a tragedy. This is the first death that we will face, of course, many. And it's a catalyst and a moment where things become darker and more sinister in Verona. And this line here, a plague on both your houses. This is a gold quotation, really important. This metaphor kind of reinforces that idea of love being parasitic. If you remember the Queen Mab speech, we have words like hag, blisters, plagues, things like that. The idea that love was sinister. And again, here we have plague. So it reinforces that overall theme of disease and sickness, and the idea of things being parasitic, the idea of love being corrupting and something that's damaging them. And there's this allusion as well to the sickness of Verona, the corruption in Verona is this plague. And by saying a plague on both your houses, Mercutio is placing that blame with both the Montagues and the Capulets. And he says, I am sped. Is he gone and hath nothing? What art thou hurt? Aye, a scratch, a scratch. Notice this understatement. Mercutio is concerned about his reputation and status as a man, even at the moment where he is dying. He insists it's just a scratch. 'Tis enough. Where is my page? Go, villain, fetch a surgeon. Courage, man. The hurt cannot be much. No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. A plague on both your houses. Zounds, a dog, rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. A braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm. Look again at these animalistic references, just like Ratcatcher and King of Cats. We've got a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat. So these animalistic references to kind of devalue the enemy, but equally to question their kind of morals and status and their kind of goodness as men, to have reduced themselves to the nature of animals. I thought all for the best. Help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint. A plague on both your houses. They have made worms meat of me. I have it, and soundly too. Your houses! So made worms meat of me here is an imagery of decay, reminding us that Mercutio is collateral damage of the feud. Remember, he isn't really a Montague or a Capulet. He's not of either household. He's a friend of Romeo, and he's been killed. The first example of collateral damage, people who are killed but aren't directly involved. You have collateral damage in war when citizens die, for instance, innocent people. So it's reminding us that innocent people die as a result of this feud. This gentleman, the prince's near ally, my very friend, hath got his mortal hurt in my behalf, my reputation stained with Tybalt's slander. Tybalt, that an hour hath been my cousin. O sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate, and my temper softened valour's steel. So he's saying here, when he says your beauty has made me effeminate, effeminate means feminine. So he's saying that Juliet has caused him a loss of masculinity, that he's become devoted to love. Now, if you remember, the friar gave us this premonition that there was to be this kind of dark turn in the events. And again, this is reinforced in what comes next and what the characters say. Particularly here, this line from Romeo. But first we have Benvolio says, O Romeo, Romeo, brave Mercutio is dead. That gallant spirit hath aspired the clouds, which too untimely here did scorn the earth. This day's black fate on mo days doth depend. This but begins the woe, others must end. So Romeo's talking about his black fate, the idea that his fate has changed and become blackened. Okay, and remember the friar warned him, these violent delights have violent ends. So he's seeing this prophecy come true. He's seeing his fate turn against him. Enter Tybalt. Here comes the furious Tybalt back again in triumph, and Mercutio slain. Away to heaven, respective lenity, and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt, take the villain back again, that late thou gavest me for Mercutio's soul, is but a little way above our heads, staying for thine to keep him company. Either thou or I, or both, must go with him. And here we've got fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Fire-eyed fury, fire like in hell, is hellish imagery. Here, Romeo aligns himself with evil and sin. He aligns himself with vengeance against Tybalt and murder, effectively. Thou wretched boy that did consort him here, shalt with him hence. This shall determine that. So Tybalt returns to kill Romeo. He says, that man you consort with, you will be with him again in heaven, effectively, because he's going to be killed. This shall determine that. And they fight. Tybalt falls. And again, another death has been caused, this time the death of Tybalt. So Romeo now has killed Tybalt in vengeance. Romeo, away, be gone. The citizens are up and Tybalt slain. Stand not amazed. The prince will doom thee death if thou art taken. Hence be gone, away. Romeo says, oh, I am fortune's fool. Now that personification of fate, fortune, I am the fool of fortune, I am at the mercy of fortune, shows how Romeo feels he's the victim of his fate. And there's a subversion at this point from peace to conflict. And this is a kind of theme that now continues as the play progresses. Now, I'm going to upload some additional resources onto the VLE about this, but a gold idea that relates to this is something we call Boethius's notion of the wheel. Now, Boethius was a kind of ancient philosopher, and he believed in the idea of the changeable nature of fate. You might have heard of the wheel of fortune, for instance. The idea is that your fate is like a wheel, and so things may be going well and you may be at the top of that wheel, but you could be dashed downward. So it's about the changing nature of people's fates. So Romeo feels that he's gone from just hours before being happy on top of the world to being dashed all the way down and being once again the victim of his fate. And this is where, of course, the men are intercepted by the law, by the citizens and the officers of the watch. Which way ran he that killed Mercutio? Tybalt, the murderer, which way ran he? There lies that Tybalt. Up, sir, go with me. I charge thee in the prince's name, obey. Enter the prince, old Montague, Capulet, their wives and all. Where are the vile beginners of this fray? O noble prince, I can discover all the unlucky manage of this fatal brawl. There lies a man slain by young Romeo, that slew thy kinsman, brave Mercutio. Tybalt, my cousin, O my brother's child, O prince, O husband, O the blood is spilled of my dear kinsman, prince, as thou art true, for that blood of ours shed blood of Montague. O cousin, cousin! Benvolio, who began this bloody fray? Tybalt here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay. Romeo that spoke him fair bid him bethink how nice the quarrel was, and urged withal your high displeasure. All this uttered with gentle breath. Calm look, knees humbly bowed, could not take truce with this unruly spleen of Tybalt, deaf to peace, but that he tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast, who, as all as hot, turns deadly point to point, and with a martial scorn, with one hand beats cold death aside, and with the other sends it back to Tybalt. Okay, now before we move on over the page, just highlight here Tybalt, deaf to peace, because there's a good quotation about Tybalt, that metaphor that he's totally deaf to peace. Remember at the beginning he says, peace, I hate the word. So this sets Tybalt, the tyrant, Tybalt, nominative determinism again, as the antithesis of Benvolio, the good character. And in this sense, Tybalt is the antagonist, he's the villain, whereas Romeo, of course, is our protagonist, our hero. Tybalt is the antagonist, deaf to peace, always keen for a fight. Okay, nearly at the end of this scene now. Cold death aside, and with the other sends it back to Tybalt, whose dexterity retorts it. Romeo, he cries aloud, hold, friends, friends, part, and swifter than his tongue, his agile arm beats down their fatal points. So he's defending Romeo here. He's saying Romeo tried to stop the fight. And twixt them rushes, underneath whose arm an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio, and then Tybalt fled. By and by comes back to Romeo, who had but newly entertained revenge, and to it they go like lightning, for ere I could draw to part them, was stout Tybalt slain, and as he fell did Romeo turn and fly. This is the truth, or let Benvolio die. Interesting the use of the word, they go like lightning. Remember, Juliet warns Romeo earlier on, says too like the lightning, warns that his actions are too rash, too quick. And in the same way, again, have his actions been too rash and too quick, and that's how Tybalt has been killed. It reminds us of that immaturity of Romeo, certainly. He is the kinsman to the Montague, this Lady Capulet now. Affection makes him false, he speaks not true. Some 20 of them fought in his black strife, and all those 20 could but kill one life. I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live. Romeo slew him, he slew Mercutio, who now the price of his dear blood doth owe. Not Romeo, prince, he was Mercutio's friend. His fault concludes, but what the law should end, the life of Tybalt. And for that offence, immediately do I exile him hence. So this is the punishment from the prince. Romeo is exiled, which just means cast out. I've written that there in brackets, from Verona. And these rhyming couplets here from the prince, listen as we read this final part, convey his authority, the finality of his judgment that Romeo will be exiled. And that sense of authority in the prince as he's making this decision. And for that offence, immediately do we exile him hence. I have an interest in your heart's proceedings. My blood for your rude brawls doth lie a bleeding. But I'll immerse you with so strong a fine, that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, nor tears nor prayers shall purchase out abuses. Therefore use none, let Romeo hence in haste. Else where he is found, let that hour is his last. Bear hence this body, and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill. Okay, we'll stop there.